In 1985, a computer went on sale that was 10 years ahead of Apple and Microsoft. It ran several programs at once. Full color, real stereo sound. And it did all that in a year when the machine on every office desk showed green text on a black screen and froze if you asked it to do two things at once. Television studios would soon run on it. Artists built careers on it. At its launch in New York, Andy Warhol walked on stage and painted a live portrait of the singer Debbie Harry on its screen in front of a crowd. And the company that owned this machine, the most advanced personal computer on Earth, never ran a single television advertisement for it in the United States. Not one. It let the future sit in a warehouse. 9 years later, the company was bankrupt. The machine was dead, and the man who designed it died 7 weeks after the company that buried it. This is the story of the Amiga, the computer that was too far ahead to save, and, strangest of all, too valuable to let rest. You may have heard the first half of this before, if you were here for the story of Commodore, the company that bought the Amiga and let it rot from the boardroom down. That was the story of the men at the top. This is the story of the machine itself, and of something stranger than a bankruptcy. Because when the Amiga died, it did not simply get forgotten. Its name became so valuable, and its ownership so tangled, that a machine everyone claimed to love spent the next 30 years as a hostage, fought over in courtrooms by people who could not agree on who owned its soul. Every week we tell the story of something built better than the world deserved, then destroyed by the people who were supposed to protect it. If that is your kind of story, the like and the subscribe keep them coming. To understand what was thrown away, start with a man who wanted to build a game machine. His name was Jay Miner, and by the early 80s he was already a quiet legend inside the industry. The engineer who had designed the custom chips inside the Atari 2600 and the Atari home computers. Miner believed the future belonged to custom silicon. Chips built to do one job faster than any general-purpose processor ever could. In 1982, in Santa Clara, California, he and a small team started a company to build the most powerful game console the world had seen. They gave the secret project a woman's name. Lorraine, to hide what they were really doing, they told outsiders the company made medical gear and exercise equipment. And they called it Hi-Toro before settling on a warmer word. Amiga, Spanish for a female friend. It sat first in the alphabet, ahead of Atari, and it sounded like nothing else in computing. Then, Miner and his engineers did the thing that changed everything. They built 3 custom chips, each one a specialist. One moved graphics and memory around the machine at a speed nothing else could touch. One drew the color. One made the sound. 4 channels of real stereo audio in a decade when rivals beeped through a single tinny speaker. Miner, a gentle and deeply religious man, gave the chips human names, Agnus and Denise and Paula, as if they were members of a family. And together that family did things that looked, in 1985, like a card trick you could not explain. Thousands of colors on screen at once, smooth, flowing animation. And underneath all of it, an operating system that could run many programs at the same time without any of them freezing the others. A feature the Macintosh would not match for 15 years, and Windows would not reach until 1995. The world got its first glimpse of that magic in January of 1984, at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and the glimpse became a legend. Lorraine did not look like a computer yet. It was a tangle of breadboards and hand-wired chips hauled to the show in pieces, so fragile the team was afraid to breathe near it. The night before the doors opened, 2 of the engineers, R.J. McCall and Dale Luck, stayed up writing a demo to prove the hardware was real. What they wrote was a single red and white checkered ball, spinning and bouncing across the screen, throwing a shadow, landing with a boom that thudded out of the speakers in stereo. That was all it did. And people who saw it stood there and refused to believe it. Nothing on the market could animate like that, and this pile of wires was doing it while playing sound, without breaking a sweat. The bouncing ball became the machine's unofficial logo, and it is still, 40 years later, the first image an Amiga fan sees in their head when someone says the name. Picture what that gap meant in practice. On the Amiga in 1985, you could render a graphic, play music, and format a disk at the same time, and the machine did all three at once without complaint. On the beige business computer sitting in every office that same year, you could not print a document and keep typing without the whole thing seizing up. The Amiga was not a little better than its rivals. It was a message from the middle of the next decade, delivered years early to a world that was not ready to understand it. Its graphics could throw thousands of colors onto a screen when rivals at the price managed 16, and it could paint straight over live video, the trick that would later let it run television. By the time Lorraine was finished, though, the ground had moved under it. The video game business had collapsed. The great crash of 1983 wiped out the console market almost overnight, and a game machine was suddenly the last product on Earth anyone wanted to fund. So the little company did the only thing it could. It turned Lorraine into a full computer, bolted on a keyboard, and went hunting for someone big enough to build it. What happened next was one of the strangest deals in the history of the industry. Running out of cash, Amiga borrowed $500,000 just to keep the lights on, and the company that lent them the money was Atari, now run by Jack Tramiel, the same man who had just stormed out of Commodore. Tramiel wanted those custom chips for himself, and the loan came with terms that would have handed him the whole technology if Amiga failed to pay it back. Amiga could not pay it back. And in August 1984, at almost the last possible moment, Commodore swept in, bought the entire company for $27 million, and used part of that money to clear the Atari loan out from under it. Tramiel was furious. He sued. Commodore sued right back. The two companies spent years hurling lawsuits at each other over who had stolen what, while the miracle machine at the center of the fight sat nearly complete, waiting for somebody to simply finish it. There was one more twist in that feud. Denied the Amiga chips, Tramiel had his Atari team build their own 16-bit machine, the Atari ST, and rushed it to market months before the Amiga even shipped. It was cheaper, and it got there first, though it could never match the Amiga for color or sound. For the rest of the decade, the two machines split bedrooms down the middle, and their owners still argue over which was better 40 years later. But the Amiga held the harder magic. The custom silicon Tramiel had wanted so badly, he tried to seize it through a loan. Commodore did finish it. On the 23rd of July, 1985, at Lincoln Center in New York, the Amiga 1000 went on sale for $1,295. And Commodore threw it a launch the technology world had never seen before. That was the night Warhol painted Debbie Harry live on the screen. The engineers left a signature of their own where almost nobody would find it. Molded into the plastic on the inside of the case lid were the handwritten names of the team that built it, and next to them, the paw print of Michie, J. Minor's cockapoo, who had sat with him through every late night of the design. The people who made this machine loved it enough to sign it like a painting, on the inside, where only the faithful would ever look. And the choice of Warhol was not a random celebrity grab. The Amiga was the first computer built to be an instrument for art as much as a tool for work, and the people who understood that first were not accountants. They were filmmakers, musicians, and animators. On the Amiga, a painter could work in thousands of colors for the first time, and a musician could open a new kind of software called a tracker and arrange samples into a finished song on a machine that cost less than a decent guitar. Word spread not through advertising, which barely existed, but through the people who used one and could not stop talking about what it let them make. Then the thing that turned a brilliant computer into a genuine revolution arrived from outside Commodore entirely. In 1990, a small company called NewTek shipped an ad on board for the Amiga called the Video Toaster. Before it existed, the equipment to add professional effects, titles, and transitions to video cost around $100,000 and lived only inside broadcast studios. The Video Toaster did that same work on an Amiga for around $4,000. Overnight, a machine a family could almost afford could produce real television. Local stations and wedding videographers ran on it. Tucked inside the toaster box was a three-dimensional animation program called Lightwave, and that little bundled extra would outlive everything around it, growing into a standard tool of television effects for the next decade. And when a new science fiction series called Babylon 5 needed to fill deep space with fleets of warships on a television budget, it rendered those battles on Amigas running that software, and the team won an Emmy for visual effects doing it. For a few remarkable years, a slice of what Americans watched at night was made on a computer the industry had already declared a failure. And then there was Europe, where the Amiga did not become a tool. It became a way of life. In 1987, Commodore released a cheaper model, the Amiga 500, a single wedge with the keyboard and all three custom chips built in, priced for a family living room instead of a production studio. In Britain, in Germany, across Scandinavia, it did not sell in the thousands. It sold in the millions. In the winter of 1989, British shops sold the Amiga 500 in a cardboard bundle called the Batman Pack. The computer boxed together with the Batman movie game and a handful of others, and that single bundle moved close to 200,000 units in one Christmas season in one country. Parents thought they were buying a games machine. What they were actually carrying home, in a box with a bat on it, was the most advanced personal computer on the planet. By late 1990, Europe made up around 85% of Commodore's entire business, and almost all of that was this one machine. A whole generation of European teenagers learned what a computer even was on an Amiga 500, and a startling number of them learned to make things on it. Bedroom programmers taught themselves to push the custom chips far past what the manual claimed was possible, then competed in an underground world called the Demoscene, writing dazzling little programs whose only purpose was to prove what the machine and the coder behind it could really do. None of it paid a cent. It was done for pride, traded on floppy disks and shown off at weekend gatherings where hundreds of coders packed a hall to watch each other's work on a big screen. Those kids grew up into studios. DMA Design, who made Lemmings, Psygnosis, Team 17. The Bitmap Brothers. Bullfrog, a huge share of the modern European games industry, was born on the Amiga, written by people who had first fallen for it as children in their bedrooms. The games they made are still spoken about with a catch in the voice: Lemmings and Shadow of the Beast and Sensible Soccer, titles a British or German teenager of 1990 could name faster than half their own family. The machine had the one thing money can never buy. Devotion. Commodore had it for free across an entire continent and did almost nothing to feed it. Because here is the part that still makes grown engineers angry. Commodore held the most advanced computer in the world and simply stopped improving it. The custom chips that made the Amiga a miracle in 1985 were nearly the same chips still sitting inside it in 1992. The research budget that could have built the next generation got cut year after year. There was no real successor, no serious roadmap, and in the United States, where the machine needed someone to fight for it, there was no advertising at all, so a slower and uglier beige box with a fraction of the ability won every office in the country simply because people had heard of it. We told the boardroom half of that story in the Commodore episode, the men who paid themselves millions while the engineers packed their desks and walked out. There was one last gamble. In September of 1993, Commodore squeezed the Amiga's chips into a black game console called the CD32, the first 32-bit CD machine sold in the West, beating the PlayStation to the idea by 2 full years. In Britain, it briefly outsold everything with a disk drive. Then, an American patent judgment Commodore could not afford to pay shut the console out of the United States entirely. Stock sat trapped in warehouses, and the machine that was supposed to save the company instead sat on docks while the company underneath it bled out. By then, the Amiga was still selling on graphics that had stunned the planet 8 years earlier, and now looked ordinary. The money ran out. On the 29th of April, 1994, Commodore filed for bankruptcy and shut its doors. And then a detail almost too cruel to write down. 7 weeks later, on the 20th of June, 1994, J. Minor died. The man who had dreamed the machine into being did not outlive the company that wasted his life's work by even 2 full months. The father of the Amiga and the Amiga itself went into the ground in the same spring, and somewhere in a landfill or an attic, thousands of case lids still carried his signature and his dog's paw print on the inside. That should be the end of it. It is not, and this is exactly where the Amiga breaks away from every other dead computer we tell you about. When Commodore collapsed, its assets went up for auction, and the Amiga did not get to rest, because far too many people understood precisely how much its name was still worth. A German company called Escom bought it in 1995, tried to bring it back, and went bankrupt itself the very next year. The American maker Gateway bought the wreckage in 1997, kept the valuable patents, and passed the name along. From there, it went to a company that renamed itself Amiga Incorporated, then onward again, with the trademarks and the copyrights and the operating system splitting apart like a family estate carved up among heirs who could not stand one another. And they truly could not stand one another. For the next 20 years, the Amiga was not a computer. It was a lawsuit. The rights to keep developing the operating system landed with a Belgian company called Hyperion, who built new versions under license. The copyrights to the original software ended up with an Italian company called Cloanto. And those parties, along with everyone else who had ever held a scrap of the name, sued and countersued for decades over who was allowed to sell what, who owned which logo, who had broken which settlement. There were court battles in the 2000s and fresh ones starting in 2018. Engineers who genuinely wanted to build new Amiga hardware found that they could not, because no single person on Earth clearly owned the whole machine anymore. Project after project stalled, not because the engineering was hard, but because a lawyer somewhere could always claim a piece of it. The very thing that had made the Amiga special, that it was built and loved by people who cared too much, curdled into the thing that trapped it. Everyone loved it too much to let it go, and nobody could agree on whose it was. Which brings us to right now, and the strangest turn in the whole story. In 2025, the Commodore name itself came roaring back to life. A British filmmaker and retro computing personality known online as Peri Fractic bought the Commodore trademarks outright, brought back some of the original 1980s engineers, and started shipping new hardware under the old name, including a working remake of the Commodore 64 that sold out on release. A dead brand, breathing again. And almost the instant it did, the question that has haunted this entire story came straight back. What about the Amiga? The answer, in 2026, is that it is complicated in the most Amiga way imaginable. The new Commodore controls 47 surviving trademarks from the old empire, but the Amiga is not cleanly among them. Its name and its software still sit with Cloanto and its owner, Mike Battilana, tangled in the same web of rights that 30 years of lawsuits never fully unpicked. Peri Fractic has said in the open that he and Battilana are the two people most determined to put the broken pieces back together, that reuniting Commodore and Amiga is on his mind. But as of this year, no deal has been signed. The machine that was a decade ahead of the entire world is still, in 2026, waiting for its owners to simply agree that it deserves to exist. Every fan watching the new Commodore's sold-out remakes knows where the real prize sits. The one machine that would finish the story, the one that was 10 years ahead of the world, is the one still locked outside the door. So what really happened to the Amiga? It was not beaten by a better machine, because for years there was no better machine. It was killed first by owners who could not see what they were holding, and then imprisoned by owners who could see exactly what they held and refused to share it. The tragedy of the Commodore boardroom was neglect. The tragedy of the Amiga afterlife was the opposite, a name loved so fiercely that the love itself became a cage. And through every year of it, the people who actually used the machine never left. They wrote emulators so the old software would run forever, on hardware J Minor could never have imagined. They kept the demo scene alive, still coding brand new art on 30-year-old chips just to prove it can be done. They paid real money at auctions for machines a bankruptcy court had once valued at nothing. In 2014, art conservators in Pittsburgh pulled a stack of aging floppy disks out of the Andy Warhol Museum archives and managed to recover the files from that 1985 launch night. Warhol's own Amiga experiments, including a soup can he had doodled on the screen and signed. The paintings had outlived the painter, the computer, and the company, sleeping on floppy disks for 30 years. That is not how anyone treats an obsolete computer. That is how people guard something they were promised and never fully got to keep. The Amiga was a message sent back from 10 years in the future, delivered to a company that filed it in a drawer, and its admirers have spent 4 decades refusing to let that message be lost, even as they argued over who was allowed to hold the envelope. Somewhere tonight, an Amiga 500 is sitting in a closet, its custom chips gone cold. The same machine that once ran television networks and taught a continent to code. And in a handful of offices, lawyers and enthusiasts are still working out who is even allowed to bring it back. The men who owned it and wasted it are long gone. The machine outlived every one of them, and the fight over it outlived them too. One last thing before you go. The Amiga was not the only piece of genius from that era that its own owners could not manage to hold on to. There was a company that built a computer chip so far ahead of Intel that the rest of the industry quietly ran the other way, and its own leadership sold the technology off piece by piece until it ended up powering the machines of the very rivals who had feared it. Most people have never heard its name. That story is next. And if you ever owned an Amiga, if you made something on one that you still remember, tell me what it was. I read every comment.